For someone who had everything, Emily Montgomery often felt like she had nothing at all. The chandelier sparkled like a constellation in the grand dining hall as Emily swirled her wineglass, pondering the weight of her life's expectations. In the world I was born into, she thought, wealth isn't a blessing, it's a weapon. Emily Montgomery, an heiress to the sprawling Montgomery estates, had everything most people could only dream of: luxury cars, designer wardrobes, and a penthouse overlooking the glittering cityscape. But beneath her polished exterior lay an insecure young woman conditioned to believe that her worth was tied solely to her fortune. Then there was Emma, her maid, a stark contrast to Emily in every way. Emma's life was modest, her resources limited, but her heart was vast. Always humming a cheerful tune as she went about her work, Emma's kindness radiated a warmth that Emily both envied and dismissed. How can she be so content with so little? Emily often wondered, the question clawing at her thoughts. Before we dive deeper into Emily's journey and her surprising bond with Emma, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned till the end. You won't want to miss how their story unfolds and the lessons they learn from each other. The morning sun streamed through the tall, arched windows of the Montgomery estate, painting golden patterns on the polished marble floors. Emma moved through the vast halls with practiced ease, her footsteps light and deliberate. In her arms, she carried a stack of freshly folded linens, the faint scent of lavender wafting through the air as she passed. Emma was the heartbeat of the household, though she would never claim such a title. To her, work was not a matter of pride or recognition, but of responsibility. She smoothed out the linens on the guest room bed, her hands steady and precise. Every crease mattered. Every detail spoke of her quiet dedication. Her days began long before the rest of the house stirred. Before the sun rose, Emma was already in the kitchen, her hair tied back neatly, preparing for the day. Whether it was arranging the dining table for breakfast or ensuring the garden flowers were fresh in their vases, Emma left no task unfinished. Yet, Emma wasn't just diligent. She carried herself with a sense of calm that often surprised those around her. Even in the face of demanding schedules or sharp orders from Mrs. Colson, the estate's head housekeeper, Emma never raised her voice, never faltered. Her humility wasn't weakness, it was strength, though few recognized it. Despite her unassuming nature, Emma had a way of leaving a mark on people. The cook, Mrs. Avery, often remarked, "That girl's got a steady hand and a steadier heart. Not many like her these days." But Emma didn't let the rare compliments inflate her ego. If anything, she seemed almost oblivious to them, focusing instead on the work at hand. She moved from room to room, her soft humming a constant companion. The melody, though simple, brought an odd sense of peace to the grand, often cold estate. Though Emma rarely spoke of herself, there was a quiet dignity about her that couldn't be ignored. She had her own struggles, ones she bore silently, but they never seemed to dim the light in her eyes. Perhaps it was this resilience that drew people to her. In the servants' quarters, where laughter and exhaustion mingled at the end of each day, Emma was a steady presence. She listened more than she spoke, offering a comforting word when needed, or simply a kind smile that said more than words ever could. That morning, as Emma dusted the study, she noticed Emily standing by the window, lost in thought. It wasn't unusual for Emily to appear distracted, but there was something different in her stance, a heaviness Emma couldn't ignore. Emma paused for a moment, then quietly resumed her work. She knew better than to interrupt, but her silent presence seemed to fill the room with a sense of calm. Without a word, Emma continued dusting, her movements as graceful as ever. She didn't know it yet, but her steadfastness was about to become more important than she could imagine. The idea came to Emily during a quiet afternoon, as she watched Emma hum softly while arranging flowers in the sitting room. Something about Emma's calm composure grated on her nerves that day. How could someone so insignificant, so unremarkable, seem so at peace when Emily, with all her wealth and privilege, felt like she was unravelling? Emily swirled her tea absent-mindedly, her gaze fixed on Emma's effortless movements. It wasn't the first time she had felt this way, but today, the feeling bloomed into something sharper. She was tired of feeling small in the presence of someone so far beneath her. A plan began to form in her mind, one that felt clever and justified in the moment. That evening, Emily carefully wrote an invitation on her monogrammed stationery, folding it neatly into an embossed envelope. She called Emma to her study, her tone unusually warm. "Emma," Emily began, her voice dripping with feigned kindness. "You've been working so hard lately. I feel it's only right to show my appreciation." Emma blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Miss Montgomery, that's very thoughtful, but—" "No buts," Emily interrupted, her smile widening. "There's an event at the Lancaster Club tomorrow night, a gathering of the city's elite. I want you to come as my guest. Consider it a reward for your dedication." Emma's hands faltered slightly as she accepted the envelope, her expression a mix of gratitude and hesitation. "That's very kind of you, Miss Montgomery, but are you sure it's appropriate? I wouldn't want to overstep." "Nonsense," Emily replied breezily, masking the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "I insist. Besides, it'll be good for you to experience something different." Emma nodded, her humility preventing her from questioning Emily's sudden generosity. "Thank you," she said softly, clutching the envelope as though it were a rare treasure. After Emma left the room, Emily leaned back in her chair, her chest swelling with a sense of triumph. She could already picture the scene. The Lancaster Club was a haven for the wealthy and influential, a place where appearances mattered more than anything else. Emma, in her simple attire and unpolished demeanour, would stick out like a sore thumb. The thought of seeing Emma awkward and out of place brought an unsettling satisfaction. It wasn't cruelty, Emily told herself. It was a lesson, a reminder of their respective places in the world. The next day, Emily busied herself with preparations for the evening. She chose her gown carefully, ensuring it was the most striking in her wardrobe. By the time the car arrived to take them to the event, her excitement had grown into a quiet anticipation. Emma appeared in the doorway, wearing her best dress, a modest outfit that, while neat, was worlds apart from the glitz and glamour Emily expected at the club. Emily barely concealed a smirk. "Shall we?" she said smoothly, gesturing for Emma to follow. Emma smiled nervously and stepped into the car. She had no idea what awaited her. The Lancaster Club was alive with a glittering buzz as the city's elite mingled beneath a canopy of crystal chandeliers. The walls were adorned with gilded mirrors, reflecting the opulence of silk gowns, tailored suits, and trays of champagne carried by white-gloved waitstaff. Laughter and the hum of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the clink of glasses. Emma hesitated at the grand entrance, her hands clutching the simple clutch bag she had borrowed from one of the other maids. Her best dress, though neatly pressed, seemed almost invisible against the dazzling fabrics around her. She glanced at Emily, who stood beside her like a queen surveying her court. "Don't look so nervous," Emily said, with a saccharine smile. "This is supposed to be fun." Emma nodded quickly, swallowing her discomfort. She had never stepped foot in a place like this, where every detail radiated wealth and exclusivity. She felt small, like an intruder in a world that wasn't hers. The room seemed to notice her the moment she stepped inside. Conversations paused briefly as heads turned. A ripple of curiosity passed through the crowd, followed by hushed whispers. Emma felt the weight of every glance, every upturned nose. Emily led her through the throng, her demeanour poised and confident. As they stopped near a cluster of acquaintances, Emily's smile brightened. "Everyone, this is Emma," she announced, her tone sweet yet oddly sharp. "She works in my household. I simply had to bring her tonight." Emma offered a shy smile, her cheeks flushing as she nodded politely. The group returned her greeting with polite murmurs, but their eyes held something else, judgment, perhaps even disdain. "I must say," one woman in an emerald gown began, her voice dripping with feigned politeness, "it's so refreshing to see someone from a different background here, isn't it, Charles?" The man beside her chuckled softly. "Indeed, it's quite the unique choice." Emma's smile faltered, but she kept her posture steady. She didn't know what to say, so she simply stood quietly, letting the moment pass. Emily, pretending not to notice, turned to Emma with a beaming smile. "Why don't you help yourself to some champagne, Emma? The waiters here are excellent. Oh, and do try the hors d'oeuvres. They're divine." Emma nodded and excused herself, grateful for the opportunity to step away. She made her way to a quiet corner, where she stood awkwardly, unsure of where to look or how to blend in. As the night went on, the subtle slights continued. People would pause their conversations when she passed, only to resume with muffled laughter the moment she was out of earshot. Emily, meanwhile, flitted through the crowd like a butterfly, occasionally glancing at Emma with a satisfied expression. Emma's discomfort grew, but she reminded herself that she had been invited as a guest. She wouldn't let the whispers break her composure. Standing by a gilded mirror, she straightened her shoulders, trying to project the same quiet dignity she carried in the estate. Little did she know, the night was far from over. Emma lingered near the edge of the grand ballroom, clutching a delicate glass of sparkling water. She hadn't dared touch the champagne, unsure if it was even appropriate. The opulence of the room felt more suffocating with every passing minute, the stares and whispers pricking at her confidence. Across the room, Emily watched her like a hawk, her smile as polished as the diamonds around her neck. She flitted from group to group, casually dropping remarks that kept Emma at the centre of subtle ridicule. Yet, even Emily's satisfaction wavered when Alfred Wellington, the distinguished philanthropist and one of the evening's most honoured guests, made his way toward Emma. Alfred was a tall man in his 60s, his presence commanding yet approachable. His tailored suit and silver pocket watch hinted at his wealth, but his kind eyes and warm smile revealed a man of integrity. People often said Alfred was the heart of the city, his generosity unmatched, his name synonymous with compassion. Emma didn't notice him at first, her eyes fixed on the intricate patterns in the rug beneath her feet. "Excuse me, young lady," Alfred said, his voice gentle yet firm. Emma looked up, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I block your way?" She stepped aside quickly, assuming she had somehow inconvenienced him. "Not at all," Alfred said with a chuckle. "I was hoping to speak with you." Emma blinked, confused. "Me, sir?" "Yes, you." He studied her for a moment, then smiled wider. "I believe I've seen you before, but not here. You're the one they call the unknown angel, aren't you?" Emma froze, her cheeks reddening as murmurs spread around them. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Alfred tilted his head, unfazed by her modesty. "Don't be modest, my dear. I've seen your work firsthand. You're the one who brings warm meals to the shelter on 3rd Street every week, aren't you? And the one who leaves those envelopes with cash donations at the church without ever signing your name?" By now, the murmurs had grown louder, drawing more attention. Emily, standing nearby, felt her chest tighten as she watched the scene unfold. Emma shook her head slightly, her hands twisting the hem of her dress. "I don't think it's important to talk about that, sir. I'm just doing what anyone should." "Anyone?" Alfred let out a hearty laugh. "My dear, most of the people in this room wouldn't dream of doing half of what you've done with so little. You've touched lives in ways you can't even imagine." The crowd began to shift, curiosity replacing the earlier scorn. Some guests whispered in awe, others with embarrassment. Emily's carefully constructed plan was unraveling, and she felt her grip on the evening slipping. Alfred reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. "You're remarkable," he said. "It's time people know it." Emma looked down, overwhelmed by the unexpected attention. All she had ever wanted was to help quietly, not to stand in the spotlight. But now, under the glow of the chandeliers, her quiet deeds were finally coming to light. The room fell into a stunned silence after Alfred's words, the air suddenly thick with realization. Emma stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the floor as the weight of so many eyes pressed down on her. A heartbeat later, the quiet was broken by a slow clap from the corner of the room. Heads turned toward a middle-aged woman in a sapphire gown, her expression one of admiration. "Remarkable," she said softly, her voice carrying through the room. Another guest joined in, then another, until the applause grew into a steady rhythm. Emma's face flushed as she looked up, wide-eyed and unsure of how to respond. She wasn't used to being noticed, let alone celebrated. Her instinct was to shrink into the background, but Alfred's reassuring smile kept her rooted in place. "It seems we've all learned something tonight," Alfred said, addressing the crowd. "In a world where so much revolves around appearances and wealth, true worth often comes from quiet acts of kindness." The applause swelled, and Emma, overwhelmed, managed a small, grateful nod. Around the room, guests exchanged glances, their earlier judgment giving way to admiration, or guilt. The same people who had snickered at her simple dress and humble demeanor were now whispering about her generosity, their tones tinged with awe. Emily, standing frozen near a gilded pillar, felt a wave of heat rise to her face. This was not how the night was supposed to go. She had planned for Emma to be the one humiliated, for her to retreat quietly, reminded of her place. Instead, Emily found herself shrinking under the gaze of the crowd, her carefully curated image unraveling. One guest, a tall man with sharp features, leaned toward Emily. "Did you know about this?" he asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. Emily forced a tight smile, her mind racing. "Oh, well, of course, I wanted everyone to see how extraordinary she is," she said, her voice faltering slightly. The man raised an eyebrow, unconvinced, but said nothing more. Nearby, Emma was being drawn into conversations she never anticipated. Guests asked her about her work, her motivations, even offering their own contributions to the causes she supported. She answered as best she could, still adjusting to the sudden attention. Emily watched helplessly as the dynamics of the evening shifted entirely. Emma, the maid she had sought to embarrass, now stood at the center of the room, surrounded by people who hung on her every word. Her fists clenched at her sides, but she quickly released them, forcing her usual composed expression. She wasn't used to losing control, especially not in her own social circle. Her confidence, so carefully constructed over years, felt like it was cracking with every cheer and compliment directed at Emma. As the applause finally died down, Alfred patted Emma's shoulder and turned back to the crowd. "This, my friends, is a reminder to look beyond what you see. Sometimes the humblest among us carry the greatest treasures." Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding. The night wasn't over, but it was clear that the world she had so carefully built around herself would never feel quite the same again. The ride home from the Lancaster Club was suffocatingly quiet. Emily sat in the plush leather seat of the limousine, staring blankly out the window. The glittering lights of the city blurred as the car sped through the streets, but Emily's thoughts were fixed on the evening's events. Her plan, so meticulously crafted, had crumbled before her eyes. Instead of humiliation, Emma had left the party as a celebrated figure, admired by everyone in the room. Emily, however, had felt the weight of judgment shift onto her shoulders, though no one had said it outright. The humiliation stung, but what lingered deeper was a gnawing sense of shame. The applause, the genuine warmth that surrounded Emma, contrasted starkly with Emily's hollow gestures and veiled cruelty. For the first time, she saw herself as others might, a woman defined by her privilege, clinging to a facade of superiority. As the car turned into the long driveway of the Montgomery estate, Emily thought back to Alfred's words. True worth often comes from quiet acts of kindness. The phrase echoed in her mind, unraveling the belief system she had clung to her entire life. Her upbringing had always been clear. Wealth was power, and power was everything. From a young age, she had been taught to measure her value by her possessions and the status of those around her. Yet tonight, she had seen the fragility of that belief. Emma, with her simple dress and humble presence, had commanded more respect than Emily could ever remember receiving. When the car stopped, Emily stepped out slowly, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She paused at the grand front doors, the weight of the evening pressing down on her. She hesitated before entering, as if crossing the threshold would mean facing the person she no longer wanted to be. Inside, the house was silent, the usual grandeur feeling oddly empty. Emily walked through the dimly lit halls, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She stopped in the sitting room, where hours earlier she had finalized her cruel plan. The bouquet Emma had arranged that morning still sat on the table, its vibrant colors a stark reminder of her maid's quiet dedication. Emily sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. The bitterness of her actions churned in her chest. How could she have been so petty, so blind to the strength it took for Emma to live as she did? Humility, kindness, and selflessness. These were qualities Emily had dismissed as weakness. Yet tonight, they had outshone everything she had thought made her strong. Her gaze shifted to the mirror across the room, and for the first time, she didn't like what she saw. The designer gown, the diamond necklace, the perfect hair, they all felt like a mask hiding someone she no longer wanted to be. "I've been wrong," she whispered to herself, the words heavy with realization. "About everything." The room offered no answers, but Emily knew one thing. If she wanted to change, she had to start by looking beyond the world she had always known. And that would begin with Emma. The morning after the party, the mansion was unusually quiet. Emily sat at the breakfast table, staring at her untouched tea. The memory of the night lingered like a heavy cloud, and her heart was weighed down by guilt. She had avoided Emma all morning, unsure of how to face her. But Emily knew she couldn't avoid it forever. She needed to speak to Emma, not just to apologize, but to understand how someone so humble could rise above everything Emily had tried to do. She found Emma in the garden, tending to the rose bushes. The early sunlight caught in Emma's hair, giving her an almost ethereal glow. Her movements were unhurried, her focus on each flower as though it deserved all her attention. "Emma," Emily said softly, her voice faltering as she approached. Emma turned, her expression neutral but not unkind. "Miss Montgomery," she said with a small nod. Emily hesitated, the words tangling in her throat. She began, but the weight of her shame silenced her. Finally she looked down, unable to meet Emma's gaze. "I owe you an apology, for everything." Emma set down her gardening shears, wiping her hands on her apron. "You don't have to apologize," she said gently. "Yes, I do," Emily insisted, her voice trembling. "What I did was cruel. I thought humiliating you would make me feel better about myself, but all I feel is ashamed." Emma studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, she gestured for Emily to sit on the bench beneath the pergola. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, Emma said as they sat down. I've learned that much in my life. Emily glanced at her, intrigued. What do you mean? Emma smiled faintly, her gaze drifting to the flowers. I wasn't always as calm as I am now, she began. There was a time when life felt like a constant battle. My family struggled with poverty, and I lost people I loved to sickness and hardship. It would have been easy to grow bitter, to resent the world for what it took from me. But I realized that bitterness doesn't help anyone. Not me, and certainly not the people I care about. Emily listened intently, the sincerity in Emma's voice cutting through her defenses. I chose to focus on what I could do, no matter how small. Emma continued. Sometimes that meant cooking a meal for someone hungrier than me. Other times it meant working an extra shift to help a neighbour pay their bills. It wasn't much, but it made a difference. Emily swallowed hard, her chest tightening. How do you forgive so easily? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma turned to her, her eyes kind. Because holding on to anger only hurts me. And, Miss Montgomery, I believe everyone can change if they truly want to. Even you. Her words struck a chord, deep within Emily. For the first time, she saw forgiveness not as a weakness, but as a strength Emma carried effortlessly. What should I do? Emily asked, desperation creeping into her voice. I don't want to be this person anymore. Emma smiled softly. You have resources most people can only dream of. Use them for something good. Start small, but start. And don't forget to be kind to yourself along the way. Emily nodded slowly, Emma's words settling like seeds in her heart. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for change, but for redemption. The days that followed were filled with quiet reflection for Emily. She spent hours in her study, reading about the needs of the community, seeking out organizations that could use her support. It was a different kind of work than she was used to. One that didn't involve managing a team of servants or overseeing social events. It required her to listen, to understand, and most importantly, to step outside the life she had always known. One morning, Emily approached Emma in the garden again, where she was carefully pruning the hedges. There was a calmness about her, a steadiness that Emily had come to admire. Emma, Emily began, her voice steady but earnest. I've been thinking about everything you said, and I want to help. I want to make things right. Emma paused, glancing up with a quiet smile. You don't need to make anything right, Miss Montgomery. You've already taken the first step. Emily shook her head, determined. No, I want to do more than that. I want to use what I have to support the community, your community. She paused, trying to gather her thoughts. I know I can't change the past, but I want to start fresh. Will you help me? Emma's eyes softened, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Of course, but you have to promise me something, Miss Montgomery. You have to promise that you won't try to do this just for the image. It has to come from the heart. Emily nodded without hesitation. I promise. I'm ready to do the work. And so, a new chapter began. Emily started small, contributing to local shelters, funding after-school programs for underprivileged children, and working with organizations that provided food and medical aid to those in need. She began to attend community meetings, meeting with activists and volunteers who had been doing this work long before she had even considered it. But Emily didn't just throw money at problems. She made sure to be involved, attending events, volunteering her time, and listening to the stories of people who had spent their lives working for change. It wasn't easy at first. She had to confront her own biases, her own sense of entitlement. But with Emma by her side, she slowly began to see the world in a new light. Emma, in turn, continued her work with the same quiet grace she always had. With Emily's support, she was able to expand her efforts, reaching more people and helping even more families in need. The two women worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each day. They didn't always agree on everything, but they shared a common goal: to make the world a better place, one act of kindness at a time. It wasn't just about giving money. It was about building trust, fostering real change, and helping others find their own path to dignity. For Emily, it was a slow, sometimes painful journey of learning and unlearning, but with Emma's guidance, she began to see the power of humility and selflessness. As the months passed, their unlikely partnership became something much more powerful than either of them could have imagined. Emily no longer felt defined by the wealth she had once clung to. Instead, she felt defined by the impact she could have on the world around her. And through it all, Emma remained by her side, showing her that true strength came not from power, but from compassion. As the seasons changed, so did the lives of Emily and Emma. What began as a chance encounter at a party, filled with cruelty and misguided pride, had transformed into a deep, lasting partnership. The work they did together reached beyond the community's needs. It reached deep into their own hearts, reshaping the way they viewed themselves and each other. Emily, once defined by her wealth and status, had found a new sense of purpose. The lavish events, the designer clothes, and the endless cycle of appearances no longer held the same allure. Instead, she found joy in the quiet moments of giving, in the faces of the children she helped, and in the small, everyday acts of kindness that were making a real difference. She was no longer the woman who had once sought to tear others down, to feel better about herself. Instead, she became someone who lifted others up, who used her resources to help those who had always been invisible to her. With every project she funded, every hand she shook, and every conversation she had, Emily built a new identity for herself, one based not on wealth or status, but on compassion and service. And through it all, Emma remained her steady anchor. She continued to give without expectation, to work tirelessly for causes she believed in, and to be the quiet strength behind every project. Though Emily's support had amplified her efforts, it was Emma's unshakable belief in kindness that had sparked the change in Emily to begin with. In their shared mission, they learned from each other. Emma found the courage to step further into the spotlight, knowing that her quiet acts of kindness were being seen and appreciated. Emily, on the other hand, learned the true meaning of humility, not as a loss of power, but as a deepening of purpose. Their story was one of redemption. It was a reminder that no matter how far one has fallen or how misguided their past actions might have been, there is always a chance to change. Redemption comes not from external praise or acknowledgement, but from the simple, transformative act of choosing to be better, kinder, and more selfless every single day. In the end, Emily and Emma's partnership was a reflection of the world they both hoped to create, one where kindness, humility, and compassion were valued above all else. It was a world where wealth didn't define worth, and where true power lay in lifting others up rather than standing above them. Their story didn't end in a grand gesture, but in the quiet, steady work of making the world a better place, one small act of kindness at a time. And in that, they found a joy far richer than any material possession could offer.